Good morning, everybody. Now, more revelations are coming out in these so-called lockdown files where supposedly 100,000 WhatsApp messages from Matt Hancock, who was the health secretary in the UK at the time of lockdowns, and other politicians and civil servants who were involved in implementing lockdowns and all kinds of other things, have been released in the globalist newspaper called the Daily Telegraph. So there's a new revelation here that one of the things that Matt Hancock texted was that he wants to frighten the pants off people, the general public, with a new strain of COVID. So it was said. And then the ask goes on to talk about a new strain being released, or not released, but being spoken about, and so on. This is the talking up the propaganda to scare people, to change people's behaviors so that they lock down, so they're afraid to go out, so they're afraid to mix with people, and so on. Now, we knew this was happening at the time, and a lot of us who were speaking about this said this is exactly what's going on. So this really just proves what most people who were watching and who were fighting it at the same time already knew. Nevertheless, it is quite poignant and appalling to see it actually written down there as a text from the former health secretary. But this does a number of things. It's being spun here in a way that is, we all know that this guy is absolutely appalling. But he is obviously being set up to take the rap, and I hope that he ends up in jail and he gets put on trial for malfeasance in public office. He totally deserves that. So far, I haven't seen any moves to actually bring him to trial, but that's really what should happen. I mean, whether he will actually get any kind of prison time for this depends on whether they get a judge who isn't corrupted themselves and isn't part of the system. That is an issue and a problem we have in the UK. He needs a trial by jury with 12 men of the people who will certainly give him what he deserves. Let's hope that happens. But the other people who were just as much involved seem to be getting a little bit of a fair go here. You know, obviously, clearly, Boris Johnson was the Prime Minister at the time. So he took the ultimate and final decisions, but the heat is being taken off of him. And the other people that were involved as well, there's this top civil servants, Chris Whitty, who's the other one? Patrick Vallance, Van Tam, that guy. They were all chief medical officer, deputy chief medical officer, chief health officer, etc. The top civil servants who were supposedly advising the government according to what science should be, not what they said was the fake science at the time. But they seem to be getting a free ride, and they seem to be, being whitewashed a little bit. Whereas what should be happening is everybody who was involved in making these decisions, whether it was the civil servants, the people in the government, the MPs who voted for the lockdown to go through without doing any proper scrutiny, they all need to be brought to trial, and they all need to be, at least make sure they never hold office again, and a lot of them should be jailed for what they've done to people, what they did to the economy, what they did to society. But the other thing is, with these lockdown files and these revelations, as I said before, even though these things are shocking, they are diverting attention from far more serious things that happened after the initial lockdowns happened. There was the issue with midazolam, where now I hear it's 43,000 people. There's different numbers, but apparently 43,000 elderly people in care homes were given midazolam and morphine. Many of them put on this so-called end-of-life care pathway, used to be known as the Liverpool pathway, where they were given do not resuscitate orders, and most of them didn't even know about it. And they didn't have any serious illness. They might have had some symptoms of COVID, whatever that was, very similar to symptoms of flu. And the only way they told us that could distinguish between them was with this PCR test. And we know that even the World Health Organization said it's completely useless over 35 thermal cycles. And the NHS was doing 45 thermal cycles at the time. So the results of these tests were meaningless. But nevertheless, on the basis of these things, a lot of elderly people were put on this life-ending pathway with these drugs. That's not been mentioned at all in these lockdown files. In fact, the journalist who released these to the Daily Telegraph, Isabel Oakeshott, actually says that the whole midazolam thing is just a conspiracy theory. There's also the other far, far more serious issue of injections, where after the lockdown, it was used to then roll out experimental mRNA injections to 50 million plus people in the UK, billions of people around the globe. And now there's all kinds of medical complications arising from that, which you can look up and see everywhere you turn these days. That isn't being mentioned at all. And that, although the lockdown was terrible, the injections and the effects from them are even worse than what happens with the lockdowns. But there's no mention of that whatsoever. And the thing is, now we see that this health secretary, former health secretary Matt Hancock in the UK, obviously knew they were employing disgusting propaganda techniques, fear-mongering techniques to change people's behavior. The very same thing was being done about injections, where people who said, I'm not going to get one, like myself, were being called anti-vaxxers, vaccine deniers, all kinds of things, all kinds of insults are being thrown at people like us for not taking one of these things. And people are still pushing them today. People are still saying that people should be getting these injections, even though the evidence is clear and they're not good, and they've been withdrawn in many places. Even in the UK, they've been withdrawn for children now after being implemented for a number of months. So people know that this isn't good. But the other thing is, some of the very same people who are completely silent in the lockdown era, who went along with it, who are now saying, oh, isn't this terrible? We now got the lockdown files. Oh, wow, was bad. All these people were terrible, when they themselves were complicit, and actually some of them were propagandizing it too, are now just using exactly the same fear and coercion techniques for other issues, particularly to stoke up tensions and conflict in Ukraine. We got exactly the same kind of blanket propaganda that says, oh, if we don't do something about it, all the West is going to get invaded by Putin. That's ridiculous. All he wants to do in Ukraine is stop ethnic Russians from being killed in the Donbass, because the Zelensky regime and the deep states in the government in the West have not adhered to the Minsk agreements. They've broken the Minsk agreements of 2014. And therefore, Putin has said, we've got no choice but to protect ethnic Russians in those areas that are being slaughtered by National Socialist battalions and so on, which are funded, ironically, by the West. So that doesn't make any sense, on a logical point of view. But the propaganda is there to stoke this up, and then again to try to use the mainstream media and all the propaganda arms of the government to say, if you don't agree with this, there's something wrong with you. You are morally deficient. This is what's coming out. This is the same kind of techniques to control people's opinions and behavior, and to get people to be forced into accepting the government line. Now, they can't do that yet in the West by, jailing you for having the wrong opinions, but they will use every kind of means of coercion and smearing of anybody who steps out of line and who goes against the only correct line according to the government. So in the lockdown era, there was fear-mongering. They put these ads out of like people dying, older people dying with masks over their face. Look them in the eyes and tell them that you're not going to comply, or something like that. There was different things that they said. Look them in the eyes and say this. Look them in the eyes and say that. And the idea was that you wouldn't do that. So they were trying to make you feel guilty and afraid at the same time. Sometimes both at the same time, sometimes in different ways, but simultaneously. And they're also doing the same now with the Ukraine situation. So if you don't support it, then you're responsible for the slaughter that's going on yourselves. Whereas actually, it's the Western nations, the NATO nations, that have just escalated this. It could have been avoided completely, or it could have been over in a couple of months. There were moves for peace plans. Boris Johnson then went over to visit Zelensky last April, and then the peace didn't happen, and then there was escalation after escalation. So the very same people involved in the lockdowns, in the injections, are now involved in escalating war in Ukraine. And the same kind of propaganda techniques are being used in this. So the irony is now that some of the people who were all for it or were completely silent about lockdown and are now coming out in a big moral outrage, selective outrage against Matt Hancock. Okay, I understand that because he deserves it. But they're still complicit in the latest thing, in the latest exercise of propaganda, fear-mongering and control, which is to get everybody in the West to toe the line on the Ukraine conflict. And some of those same people are still agents of the government saying that if you don't agree, then you are morally wrong and you should be no platformed and you shouldn't be allowed to have an opinion. And you're smeared as all kinds of things, as like an appeaser or a Putin puppet or whatever, just like they smeared people back in 2020 as COVIDiots and granny killers. The same people are doing the same thing today. And then maybe 3 years down the line, people will come and go, oh, well, we were misled on Ukraine and, oh, this is terrible, and beat their breasts about it. But we need everyone to oppose this escalation of the conflict now. It's no good doing it 3 years down the line. The same with lockdown. Where were the people then in 2020 to stand up and oppose it? I did, and a number of other brave people did. We were out on the streets in Trafalgar Square in August and September 2020, and the marches and rallies before then and after then, where we were in danger of being hit over the head by the police, which has never happened before in this country to innocent people, as far as I know. But yeah, Matt Hancock again said, let's get heavy with the police. So they went out and they were a threat to ordinary people like me and others who were around standing up for freedom in those freedom rallies. Tens of thousands of people came out. But you see, this is what I can't stand, the hypocrisy of this, is that a lot of the people there who are now all writing opinion pieces about Matt Hancock and lockdown in these newspapers were totally silent in 2020. You know, anyone who came out with us on the freedom rallies, they have the right to speak up about it, and I have every respect for everybody who went out on those rallies and spoke up for freedom. But those who were actually chastising and smearing the people who were out on the freedom rallies and calling us super spreaders, who are now having a go at Matt Hancock, are just opportunists. And no, I don't want to use any stronger word here, but you know, it doesn't match up that they were silent at the time, and now when it's safe to say something, they say something. And then they say things like, if this happened again, I would be out there on day one. When you weren't out there on day one, you were actually propagandizing the lockdowns and the injections. It's too late to say now that you're on the right side. Okay, it's good that people are, coming over and having a go at Matt Hancock. Okay, but the people who were not there at the beginning, the people who were complicit at the beginning, and who are now also complicit in escalating war in Ukraine, and some of them are ongoingly complicit. That ongoingly is not a real English word, sorry, but you understand what I mean. Are for pumping up the climate alarmist agenda on an ongoing basis. Some of these people, they're just part of the problem, essentially, and they speak out when it's too late. So, as I said in my last video about this, the test of this now is, what are we fighting against right now? What is the government and the mainstream media pushing right now in terms of the agenda? And it is the Ukraine escalation. It is 15-minute cities, because people who are against this and Agenda 2030 are being smeared like anything in the mainstream media as the far right and whatever, and all the Agenda 2030 things. The digital identity, the central bank digital currency, and the World Health Organization new regulations, which would give them power to take control of government policy of its members if they declare an emergency. So essentially, the World Health Organization is on a huge power grab at the moment to take democracy from all of its 194 members, or thereabouts. And that is where the issues are right now. That's where the cutting edge and the battle is right now. Lockdown was 3 years ago. Great to talk about that. But if you're not talking about the things that are happening now, and if you're not speaking out against them and opposing them, then you're not on the front line. You're just talking about what happened in the past. So I'm going to be looking and seeing these people who are getting outraged in the mainstream, the globalist newspapers about Matt Hancock 3 years ago. Fine. What are they saying about Ukraine? And a lot of them would be, again, calling me and other people names and trying to silence us. And, one of the saddest things this year is that I was on a show on a TV station that a lot of you heard of, and I had a regular slot on one of the shows there, and it appears that I've been dropped, and I haven't been invited back this year. So that's a very sad thing. I'm not going to name names, but and I hope in the future that I'll get back on this channel to talk about things. But it appears that my opinions on Ukraine are outside the Overton window, because they're pushing it. You see, they're pushing the propaganda and control and fear on that issue right now. And we need to recognize that, and we need to speak out against the things that are happening right now, as well as what was happening 3 years ago. So I hope that makes sense. I've been a bit rambling today on what I'm thinking about this, because I've got mixed feelings about these revelations coming out. It's good that they're coming out, but we've got to make sure that they don't distract us from being engaged in what's happening right now, and that we don't take our eyes off the ball about, this shouldn't be a smoke screen for what they're doing now, and just get us focused back on what was happening in 2020. We're in 2023. The agenda's moved on, and we need to keep ahead of them and restore our nation. So if you'd like to get involved, please do come and join me in the Heritage Party. We're running out of time for selecting and getting candidates for the local elections this year. The local elections are on the 4th of May. Nomination papers have to be handed in by the 4th of April to get on the ballot paper, but of course you need a bit of time before then to get organised and to fill the forms in and get signatures and understand what you're doing. So we're coming up to sort of, the last call for candidates. If you want to get involved in politics this year, you're going to have to make a decision quite quickly. So please, if you are thinking about it, don't delay any further. Come and join me in the Heritage Party stand in local elections in your area to fight Agenda 2030 at a local level. But that's also going to be a very good basis and platform to a springboard into the general elections, which will be next year in 2024. So please come and get involved for political resistance with the Heritage Party at heritageparty.org. Have a look there. Have a look at our manifesto. Become a member, become a candidate, and get involved. Thank you for listening to the end of this. Okay, just keep fighting. God bless you all.